So here's a big question. When the government makes a promise using federal money, can you actually sue them if they don't deliver? It's a huge deal, and it's right at the heart of a recent Supreme Court showdown, Medina versus Planned Parenthood. And believe it or not, this whole thing didn't start in some fancy courtroom. It started with one patient making a choice.
Yeah, before we get all tangled up in the legal jargon, we've got to remember what's really at stake here. This isn't just about abstract laws and old court cases. It's about a real person's ability to make a really fundamental choice about their own healthcare. So let me introduce you to Julie Edwards. She's a Medicaid patient in South Carolina. According to the court documents, she had, and I'm quoting here, especially positive experiences with Planned Parenthood and wanted them to handle all her reproductive health care. Makes sense, right? But then South Carolina decided to kick Planned Parenthood off its list of approved Medicaid providers. And just like that, her very personal choice was in jeopardy. And that decision kicked off a legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. So this wasn't just about one person's problem anymore. It became a legal collision course. Julie's situation put two major federal laws head-to-head, forcing the courts to figure out, okay, which one meant?
Okay, so here's where the legal battle lines were drawn. On one side, you have the Medicaid free choice rule. It says that any eligible person can get medical assistance from any qualified provider. Sounds pretty straightforward. But on the other side, you have this historic civil rights law going all the way back to 1871 that allows people to sue the government if it violates their federal rights. So the huge question becomes, does that first law create a right that you can actually enforce using the second one?
Okay, so this all boils down to a key legal idea called a private right of action. It sounds complicated, but it's basically your personal power given you by a law to drag the government into court and say, hey, you have to follow this rule. The entire case hung on whether the Medicaid law was just offering a nice benefit, or if it actually handed people like Julie Edwards this power to sue.
And that leads us right to the core question the Supreme Court had to tackle. When does a federal law that hands out money, like Medicaid, also create a personal right that you, a citizen, can take to court? And let me tell you, the court has a really high bar for this. They're not just looking for a hint or a vibe. Thanks to an earlier case, they demand that Congress speak with a clear voice and show an unambiguous intent to create that right. Basically, if it's not absolutely crystal clear, it doesn't count.
So, the court uses this four-part test, and believe me, it is tough to pass. First, they look for specific rights-creating language. Does the law actually use the word right? Second, is it focused on you, the individual, or is it just telling the government what to do? The intent has to be totally unmistakable. They call it a demanding bar, and they've made it clear that finding this kind of suable right in a spending bill is a really, really rare thing.
And this comparison right here is pretty much the whole ballgame. Look at the wording. The Medicaid Act says an individual may obtain services. Now look at what's missing, the word right. Compare that to a different case about nursing home residents. That law explicitly used the word right over and over. And for the majority of the justices, that one little difference, that was everything.
So, after going through all of this, the court made its decision. But, it was a deeply divided one. The final vote was 6-3. Yeah, a pretty clear philosophical split among the justices on this one.
All right, so here's the final verdict. The Supreme Court ruled that the Medicaid free choice provision does not, I'll repeat, does not, create an individual right for a patient to sue their state in federal court. So what was the majority thinking? Well, Justice Gorsuch wrote the opinion, and it really came down to the separation of powers. He said, and I'm quoting, that figuring out the costs and benefits of who gets to sue the government is a job for the people's elected representatives, not unelected judges. Basically, they're saying if Congress wants people to have this right, they need to write it into the law, plain as day.
But wow, the three justices in the dissent saw this completely differently. They argued that this decision guts that historic 1871 Civil Rights Act and takes away the only real tool patients have to actually enforce their choice of doctor.
Justice Jackson, who wrote the dissent, she put out this really stark warning. She said this ruling is likely to result in tangible harm to real people and will strip them of a deeply personal freedom. So for the dissenters, this was not some abstract legal debate. It was about real people losing a real freedom.
Okay, so a Supreme Court decision is one thing. But what does it actually mean for the rest of us? Let's talk about the ripple effects here.
So, where do we go from here? What happens now in the real world?
All right, let's break down the main takeaways. First, and most directly, that door to federal court, it's now closed for Medicaid patients on this issue. From now on, enforcement is up to the federal government.
who could threaten to pull funding, but that's like the nuclear option. It's a drastic step that's almost never used. This ruling also sets a precedent that could make it way harder for people to enforce promises in other federal spending programs too, like education or housing. And finally, it gives states a lot more power to decide for themselves who they consider a qualified provider.
And really, when you boil it all down, this case leaves us with a huge, fundamental question about how our government works. When Congress promises something to the public, who should be in charge of making sure that promise is kept? Should it be the massive federal government, which has a lot of power but can be slow to act? Or should it be the individuals themselves, the very people these laws are supposed to help? The court has given its answer, for now, but you can bet this debate is far from over.
And that's our look at this case. Just a quick reminder, of course, this is all for entertainment and educational purposes. It's not legal advice.